This is the great call. Remain in the presence. Return to the presence. Rest in the presence. For in this resting, the kingdom becomes visible, and the life you live becomes the life of God expressed. And because we believe anxiety comes from the outer world, we have tried ceaselessly to correct the outer world in order to find peace. We have tried to arrange people, to manipulate events, to demand certainty from a life that can never deliver certainty on the material level. May each moment ahead be a moment of quiet recognition, and may this recognition reveal to you what has always been so. You are never separate. You are never alone. You are never without the fullness of God's infinite being. And so, my friends, you may notice that when you are caught up in worry, in fear, in panic, what has happened is not that the world has suddenly become dangerous. It is that you have momentarily stepped out of the awareness of the kingdom that has always been within you. The kingdom of heaven is not a place to which you will go someday. It is not a reward. It is not a future condition, and it is not a distant promise. It is a living reality, fully present at the center of your being, awaiting only your recognition. And when the mind grows still enough to sense even a trace of this presence, fear begins to dissolve, not because circumstances have changed, but because you have touched the deeper truth that circumstances cannot touch. Anxiety is not a force, it is a forgetting. Peace is not a miracle, it is a remembering. And the remembering begins right here, in this moment, with the simple acknowledgement that the life within you is infinite, complete, and forever untouched by the rise and fall of human experience. As we move together through this teaching, I ask you not to struggle, not to strive, not to fight fear or chase peace. You will discover that spiritual treatment is not an act of will, but an act of recognition. You will discover that peace is not something you create, but something you allow. And you will discover that the presence which lives in you, lives you, has never once been threatened, frightened, or anxious. It is from this recognition that transformation begins. Let us proceed a step deeper, my friends. For if we are to dissolve anxiety at its root, we must first understand what fear truly is. Fear is not an entity, not a presence, not a power. It is not a force acting upon you. Fear has no substance and no life of its own. Fear exists only as a product of the material sense of life, the belief that we are separate beings, living in a world of fluctuating conditions, dependent upon outer forms for our well-being. As long as we accept this material sense of existence, fear will appear as naturally as a shadow appears when something stands between you and the light. And so, when fear arises, it is not announcing danger, it is announcing that the mind has turned toward appearances, toward effects, toward the temporary, the insecure, the ever-changing. Fear arises only when we accept the testimony of the senses as the final word. The senses tell us, there is not enough, you are not safe, you are alone, something terrible is coming. And because we hear this through the material consciousness, it feels immediate, it feels real. Yet this experience has nothing to do with the reality of your being. The material sense sees only the outer picture, the diminishing bank account, the diagnosis, the failing relationship, the uncertain future. It sees only forms, never cause, effects, never source. And because it sees only effects, it lives in constant tension. What if the effect changes? What if the form disappears? What if the supply ends? This is the world of the senses, always unstable, always shifting, and therefore always capable of producing fear in those who trust it. But spiritual consciousness sees something entirely different. Spiritual consciousness understands that you are not dependent upon circumstances. You are not sustained by the body, by the world, by finances, by people, or by events. You are sustained by the Infinite One that lives as the very core of your being. Fear cannot touch this inner reality because this reality is not subject to change, decay, lack, or threat. Yet this experience has nothing to do with the reality of your being. So, you see, the nature of fear is illusion, the illusion that your life is lived from the outside in rather than from the inside out. The illusion that your safety lies in material conditions rather than in the presence that animates your very existence. The illusion that you are a finite being dependent upon the whims of the world. Once this is understood, you stop fighting fear. You stop wrestling with anxiety. You stop trying to escape the world or control it. For fear is not something to conquer. It is something to see through. Fear dissolves the moment you realize it was based on a misunderstanding of who you are. Fear fades as you shift from the material sense of life to the spiritual sense of life, from outer dependence to inner recognition, from the noise of the senses to the stillness of the kingdom within. This is the beginning of liberation, the understanding that fear has no power except the power we give it through misidentification. When you return to the truth of your being, fear loses its foundation, its meaning, its reality, and you begin to live not as a frightened creature of circumstance, but as an expression of the infinite presence that knows no fear at all. Now, my beloved friends, having seen that fear arises only when we are living from the material sense of existence, let us take the next step, the first true step, out of fear and into freedom. It is the step of recognition. Recognition of what? Recognition of the kingdom within you, the spiritual reality that has never been touched by fear, never been weakened by circumstances, never been threatened by the conditions of the world. This inner kingdom is not something you must build, create, or develop. It is not the result of years of study or discipline. The kingdom is already complete within you, already present, already functioning, already whole. You are not asked to create perfection. You are asked only to recognize the perfection that has always been your true nature. You see, the great error of humanity has been the belief that peace, security, and supply come from the outside. And so, when anxiety arises, the human instinct is to run outward, to seek answers from people, to fight conditions, to fix circumstances. But all of this activity takes place in the realm where fear itself was born, in the realm of appearances. And so, the more we seek outwardly, the more anxious we become. But in a moment of recognition, all of this begins to shift. When you pause, just pause, and acknowledge that the life within you is God, that the being you are is spiritual, that your consciousness is not separate from the infinite consciousness, then something remarkable happens. Fear begins to loosen its grip. Anxiety begins to soften. Why? Because you have turned inward to the source, to the reality, to the presence that is forever untouched by the turmoil of the outer world. Recognition is the great turning point. It is the moment when you stop trying to live as a separate self and allow yourself to rest in the truth that I and the Father are one. It is the moment when you stop trying to get God to come to you, and you remember that God has been the essence of your being from the beginning. It is the moment when you stop pleading for protection and realize that the infinite presence within you is the protection. This recognition does not require effort. In fact, effort is the one thing that blocks it. Recognition is gentle, quiet, natural. It is simply awareness. Awareness that the presence is here. Awareness that the kingdom is within. Awareness that you abide in spiritual safety even when the senses insist otherwise. Just once, just for a few seconds, when fear arises, turn within and remember, the kingdom of God is already within me. Say it silently, not as an affirmation to convince yourself, but as an acknowledgement of truth. In that instant, you will feel even the faintest movement of peace. You may not feel it fully at first. Perhaps it is a whisper, a softening, a slight shift. But that whisper is the beginning of freedom. That softening is the dawn of spiritual transformation. And as you continue this recognition, day after day, moment after moment, something within you awakens. You begin to sense the presence. You begin to feel the depth of your own being. You begin to rest in the truth that you are not a fearful creature of the dust, but a spiritual being living from the infinite. This is the first shift from the outer to the inner, from fear to recognition, from the material sense of life to the spiritual sense. And once this shift begins, even gently, even imperfectly, it cannot be reversed. For the kingdom within you has been waiting only for your acknowledgement. And the moment you recognize it, even briefly, it begins to unfold its peace, its assurance, its security into your experience. Now, my friends, having understood that fear arises from the material sense of life and that peace dawns through recognition of the inner kingdom, let us begin with the first of our practical movements, simple, gentle, but profoundly effective. This is what I will call the instant shift from panic to presence. It is not a technique in the ordinary sense of the word. It is a spiritual turning, a remembering, a return to your own true identity. This recognition does not require effort. In fact, effort is the one thing that blocks it. Recognition is gentle, quiet, natural. It is simply awareness. Awareness that the presence is here. Awareness that the kingdom is within. Awareness that you abide in spiritual safety even when the senses insist otherwise. And so, when fear rises suddenly, as it often does, what is required is not effort, not prayer in the sense of asking, not resistance, not analysis, but a shift of awareness, a turning from the outer report to the inner reality, a brief, quiet pause in which you remember, the presence is here. I am not alone. I am not separate. I am not subject to this appearance. The kingdom of God is within me. This turning can take place in just a few seconds. It does not require a sacred space or a long meditation. It requires willingness, a willingness to stop feeding the appearance and turn toward the reality, even in the midst of panic. Even when the mind feels as though it is spinning in 1,000 directions, there is always a tiny opening, just a breath's width in which you can pause and remember. Let me show you how simple this is. Suppose fear rises in your chest. The breath tightens. The mind begins to race toward catastrophe. In that moment, do not try to fix the fear. Do not try to force calmness. Instead, inwardly whisper, not to change anything, but to acknowledge what already is. In this moment, I rest in the presence that lives me. Or, God is the life of my being here and now. Or simply, the kingdom is within. This is the first shift from the outer to the inner, from fear to recognition, from the material sense of life to the spiritual sense. And once this shift begins, even gently, even imperfectly, it cannot be reversed. For the kingdom within you has been waiting only for your acknowledgement. And the moment you recognize it, even briefly, it begins to unfold its peace, its assurance, its security into your experience. And so, when fear rises suddenly, as it often does, what is required is not effort, not prayer in the sense of asking, not resistance, not analysis, but a shift of awareness, a turning from the outer report to the inner reality, a brief, quiet pause in which you remember, the presence is here. I am not alone. I am not separate. I am not subject to this appearance. The kingdom of God is within me. This turning can take place in just a few seconds. It does not require a sacred space or a long meditation. It requires willingness, a willingness to stop feeding the appearance and turn toward the reality. Even in the midst of panic, even when the mind feels as though it is spinning in 1,000 directions, there is always a tiny opening, just a breath's width in which you can pause and remember. The moment fear attempts to rise, you turn within instinctively, naturally, effortlessly. Some of you may say, but in the heat of panic, I cannot think of spiritual truth. And I tell you, you do not need to think spiritual truth. You need only remember one thing, just one thing. The presence is here. This alone opens the door. This alone is enough to begin dissolving the fear. This alone lifts you out of the false belief that you are a frightened, vulnerable creature living at the mercy of the world. You will discover that as you practice this simple recognition, fear begins to lose its power, its intensity, its ability to sweep you away. It may rise, but it will not overwhelm. It may not, but it cannot enter. Why? Because your consciousness is beginning to anchor itself in the kingdom, not in the ever-changing world of appearances. The instant shift from panic to presence is not a technique you master. It is a way of living, a way of being, a way of remembering who you are. And when you begin to live in this recognition, fear becomes less a threat and more a signal, an invitation to return once again to the truth that has been within you all along. Now, my beloved friends, having taken the first step in the instant shift from panic to presence, let us move deeper into the practice that sustains peace throughout the day. This second practice is one of the most liberating principles ever given to the spiritual seeker, and yet it is one of the most misunderstood. I call it divine indifference. Do not misinterpret this phrase. Divine indifference does not mean apathy, carelessness, or emotional withdrawal. It does not mean you close your eyes to suffering or ignore your responsibilities. No, it means that you no longer grant power to the appearances of the material world. You no longer allow circumstances to dictate the quality of your inner life. You no longer give authority to that which is not the presence of God. You will notice that in human living, every disturbance arises from the belief that something outside of you has the power to harm you, threaten you, diminish you, or interfere with your good. And so, when the boss criticizes your work, the mind reacts. When unexpected bills arrive, the mind agitates. When the news reports turmoil, the mind fears the future. All of this is the natural behavior of the mind living in the material sense of life. But once you begin to live from the inner kingdom, you discover something extraordinary. The outer world has no power to touch the integrity of your being. It has no power to take away your peace, no power to alter your identity, no power to separate you from the presence that is your source, your protection, your supply, and your life. Divine indifference is the recognition that nothing in the outer world is a cause. It is all effect, and the spiritual life is lived from cause, never from effect. The cause is within you. The cause is God. The cause is consciousness. The cause is the presence that breathes your breath, beats your heart, and lives its own life as you. Because this cause is infinite and unchanging, the effects that appear in the world have no real authority over you. You will notice that in human living, every disturbance arises from the belief that something outside of you has the power to harm you, threaten you, diminish you, or interfere with your good. And so, when the boss criticizes your work, the mind reacts. When unexpected bills arrive, the mind agitates. When the news reports turmoil, the mind fears the future. All of this is the natural behavior of the mind living in the material sense of life, not moved by praise, not moved by criticism, not moved by gain, not moved by loss, not moved by the rise and fall of outer conditions. This is not coldness. This is not indifference in the human sense. This is spiritual poise. This is inner freedom. This is the recognition that the only reality is God and that all else is but the fleeting movement of forms. Let me give you an example. Suppose you receive a call that a major project has fallen through or a long-expected opportunity has vanished. The human reaction will immediately say, how will I manage? What will I do? What does this mean for my future? But the spiritual practitioner pauses and remembers, my supply does not come from projects, opportunities, or people. My supply is the infinite presence within. And in that single moment of recognition, fear begins to dissolve. You are no longer reacting to the outer picture. You are abiding in the inner truth. And from this truth, right action, true guidance, and new opportunities will arise naturally, not forced, not manipulated, but demonstrated by consciousness itself. Another example, a coworker speaks harshly to you, unfairly, unjustly. The natural reaction is hurt, defensiveness, anger, but the spiritual response is altogether different. You pause and recognize, the presence in me is unmoved. The presence in them is whole. This encounter has no power to disturb the peace that God is. And suddenly, the situation softens, not because you controlled it, but because you refuse to give it power. You see, divine indifference is not indifference to people, but indifference to the belief that appearances have power. It is not indifference to your responsibilities, but indifference to fear. It is not indifference to life, but indifference to the false sense of life. When you practice this throughout your day, gently, quietly, without strain, you begin to notice something miraculous. You become steady. You become centered. You become anchored in a place that nothing in the world can shake. Circumstances rise and fall, but you remain grounded. People praise and criticize, but you remain stable. Opportunities open and close, but you remain at peace. Why? Because you are no longer living from the world. You are living from the kingdom. You are living from the presence. You are living from the inner cause that produces harmony, not the outer effects that come and go. Divine indifference is the shield of spiritual awareness. It frees you from the tyranny of appearances. It restores power to its rightful place within, in God, in consciousness, in the kingdom. And in that freedom, fear has no ground on which to stand. Now, my dear friends, having practiced the instant turning from panic to presence and the quiet steadiness of divine indifference throughout the movements of the day, we come to a third and profoundly important practice, one that completes and strengthens the work of inner transformation. This is what I call the evening recollection from kingdom consciousness, a gentle review not of your actions, but of your awareness. This practice is not introspection. It is not self-criticism. It is not a moral inventory. It is not an attempt to correct yourself. No, this practice is recognition, pure and simple. It is the opportunity to quietly acknowledge where, throughout your day, you remembered the presence and where you forgot. Each evening, perhaps before sleep or in a quiet moment after the day's activities have settled, sit comfortably, without strain, without agenda, and allow the events of your day to rise gently in your awareness, not in detail, not in analysis, but in a soft, spacious recollection. Let the day come to you. Let the memories arise naturally. Let them pass before your inner sight as clouds drift across the sky. As each moment arises, simply observe. Here I remembered the presence. Here I forgot. That is all. No correction, no condemnation, no attempt to change the past, just recognition. If you recall a moment when panic rose and your first instinct was fear, note it. There, I was living from the material sense of life, not as a failure, never as a failure, but as a simple observation. If you remember a moment when you paused, even briefly, even imperfectly, and acknowledged the kingdom within you, note that too. There, the presence was recognized. If you recall a conversation in which you reacted sharply or took offense, simply acknowledge. There, I believe, the appearance. If you recall a challenge that met you during the day and found yourself responding with calmness, stability, or compassion, then recognize. There, divine indifference was practiced, and I remained unmoved. This evening recollection is a mirror, not a mirror of the ego, but a mirror of consciousness. It shows you not who you are or who you are not, but where you are living from, the outer sense or the inner kingdom. Some of you may fear that this practice will reveal too many mistakes, too many moments of forgetfulness, but I tell you this, forgetfulness is natural. Forgetfulness is human. Forgetfulness is part of the journey. Every moment of forgetting is simply another opportunity to remember. You do not grow spiritually by condemning your forgetfulness. You grow by recognizing it without judgment. In fact, the simple act of recognition without guilt, without shame, without resistance is what loosens the grip of the material sense and opens the way for the kingdom consciousness to expand within you. As you continue this practice night after night, something beautiful begins to unfold. You begin to notice that the moments of remembrance grow more frequent. The moments of panic lessen. The reactions soften. The sense of being carried, guided, supported from within grows stronger. You begin to feel a continuity of presence, not in dramatic revelations, but in subtle, steady awakenings. Even the memories themselves begin to change. You stop seeing your day as a series of problems and tasks, and instead you begin to see each moment as part of your spiritual unfolding, each event, each conversation, each challenge serving as a doorway through which the presence can reveal itself. Do you see, my friends, this evening recollection is not about reviewing your behavior. It is about recognizing the movement of consciousness within your day. It is about discovering how often the kingdom knocked at the door of your awareness and how often you opened to it even for a second. And as you continue this gentle practice, you begin to awaken in the night with peace instead of fear. You begin to rise in the morning with a sense of inner expectancy instead of anxiety. You begin to feel the presence not only in prayer or meditation, but in the ordinary actions of daily life. The kingdom becomes not an idea, but a living reality, something you can sense, rest in, trust. This evening, recollection strengthens every other practice. It deepens the instant shift from panic to presence. It reinforces divine indifference. It builds spiritual maturity. And over time, it creates a continuity of awareness in which fear finds less and less ground to stand upon. Remember always, you are not reviewing the day to judge yourself, but to recognize the truth that the presence was with you in every moment, whether you remembered or not. And that recognition, repeated gently over weeks and months, becomes the foundation of a life lived increasingly from the kingdom within. Now, my beloved friends, before we continue further on this sacred path, let us pause and speak honestly, compassionately, and without illusion about something every sincere seeker encounters. Why does anxiety still persist even after we have turned within, practiced recognition, embraced divine indifference, and recall the presence during the day. This evening, recollection strengthens every other practice. It deepens the instant shift from panic to presence. It reinforces divine indifference. It builds spiritual maturity. And over time, it creates a continuity of awareness in which fear finds less and less ground to stand upon. Some of you, hearing these teachings, practicing them with devotion and sincerity, may say, "Joel, I understand the truth. I feel the presence at times. I recognize the kingdom within me. And yet there are days when anxiety still rises. There are nights when fear still grips me. There are moments when the world seems louder than the silence within." My friends, this is not failure. This is not spiritual immaturity. This is not evidence that the truth is not working. This is simply the nature of spiritual unfolding. Consciousness does not transform in one dramatic leap. It unfolds gently, gradually, steadily, like the dawn that begins with the faintest whisper of light before the fullness of the morning appears. 1. Anxiety persists because old conditioning is deep. For many years, perhaps decades, you have been taught to live from the material sense of life. You were taught to worry about the future, to protect yourself from the world, to strive to fear, to anticipate danger. These patterns do not disappear in a week of spiritual practice, but every moment of remembrance weakens them. Every recognition dissolves a layer. Every pause loosens the old habits. You are not undoing fear. You are awakening to a reality in which fear has no place. 2. Anxiety persists because recognition is new. You have only begun to recognize the presence within you. At first, this recognition may come in flashes, soft momentary openings, before the mind pulls you back into the familiar patterns of worry. Do not be discouraged by this. The mind returns to what it knows, and it knows the world far better than it knows the kingdom. But the kingdom is patient, the presence is gentle, and with consistent practice, the mind begins to soften, to listen, to yield. What was once a fleeting moment becomes a longer moment. What was once a whisper becomes a living awareness. 3. Anxiety persists because the mind expects instant results. The human mind believes that truth should immediately change outer conditions. It expects a spiritual practice to remove all discomfort, eliminate all obstacles, and produce instant healing. But spiritual development is not the manipulation of the outer world, it is the unfolding of inner awareness. Sometimes circumstances change quickly, sometimes they do not. But what always changes when you stay in the practice is you. And when you change, your experience of the world changes. Fear loses its authority, even if the outer picture remains the same for a season. 4. Anxiety persists because spiritual maturity requires contrast. There will be moments when fear arises strongly, not because you are failing, but because your consciousness is being invited to rise higher. These moments become opportunities, openings, doorways through which the deeper truth can reveal itself. Without the contrast, you might never turn within. Without the discomfort, you might never seek the kingdom. Without the challenge, you might never discover the vastness of the presence that holds you. Do not despise your moments of fear. They are the catalysts of awakening. 5. Anxiety persists because the path is not linear. Some days you will feel deeply centered, steady, filled with quiet confidence. On other days, the smallest disturbance will shake you. This is natural. This is human. This is the ebb and flow of spiritual growth. The point is not to remain in perfect awareness at all times. The point is to return again and again and again to the truth. Each return is progress. Each return is healing. Each return is awakening. 6. Anxiety persists because we sometimes forget that the presence is independent of our feelings. You may say, I do not feel the presence today. But my friends, the presence is not a feeling. Feelings fluctuate, but the presence is steady, unmoving, eternal. Your emotions may worry, tremble, fluctuate, but the life that is living you does not tremble. It does not worry. It does not fluctuate. It is complete. You do not practice to create the presence. You practice to recognize the presence that is already there, already here, already now. So, beloved friends, these challenges are not obstacles on your path. They are the path. These moments of fear, doubt, or forgetfulness are not evidence that you are failing. They are evidence that you are awakening. For if the kingdom were not calling you, you would not care. If the presence were not drawing you inward, you would not notice the contrast between fear and peace. The very fact that you are aware of your anxiety, aware of your longing for peace, aware of the need to turn within, this is the sign of spiritual progress. This is the blossoming of consciousness. This is the unfolding of the kingdom. And as you continue gently, patiently, without pressure or hurry, the presence will reveal itself more steadily, more deeply, more continuously, until the day comes when you realize that fear has lost its authority, not because you conquered it, but because you outgrew it. Now, beloved friends, having walked through the practices that anchor you in the inner kingdom, and having honestly acknowledged the challenges that arise along the path, let us lift our vision to the horizon and behold what unfolds when you continue faithfully and gently in this way of recognition. For spiritual growth is not measured by dramatic events, nor by sudden changes, nor by emotional highs. It is measured by the gradual transformation of consciousness, and that transformation reveals itself quietly, subtly, beautifully over time. At first, the shift may seem small, a moment of peace in the midst of tension, a softening of fear where once there was panic, a clearer sense that you are not alone, not vulnerable, not separate. These moments may feel like flickers, but they are heralds of a deeper awakening. For the presence does not shout, does not force, does not overwhelm. It whispers, it unfolds. It reveals itself gently to the consciousness prepared to receive it. Then, as days turn into weeks and weeks into months, you begin to notice a new steadiness in your being. You move through situations that once stirred you into anxiety with a quietness that surprises even you. Something within you remains grounded while the world around you rises and falls. You respond instead of react. You listen instead of panic. You see through appearances instead of being controlled by them. This is not the result of willpower. It is the fruit of awareness. You begin to discover that peace is not something you must achieve. It is something that is always here, waiting to be recognized. The outer world may not change immediately, but your relationship with it changes. And because your relationship with the world changes, the world itself begins to change in response. You find that problems are resolved with greater ease. Opportunities appear in surprising ways. Guidance comes when needed, without strain, without pressure, without frantic searching. You begin to trust the invisible activity of the presence more than the visible conditions of the world. Your relationships begin to transform. You no longer seek from others what only God can give. You stop demanding, fearing, controlling, or clinging. Instead, you begin to see the presence in them as well. And as you see the presence in them, something in them awakens in response, sometimes subtly, sometimes profoundly. Harmony emerges not because you forced it, but because you recognize the spiritual reality underlying the relationship. Divine indifference is the recognition that nothing in the outer world is a cause. It is all effect, and the spiritual life is lived from cause, never from effect. The cause is within you. The cause is God. The cause is consciousness. The cause is the presence that breathes your breath, beats your heart, and lives its own life as you. Because this cause is infinite and unchanging, the effects that appear in the world have no real authority over you. The outer form begins to reflect the inner recognition. Health also begins to be understood differently. Instead of fearing the body or identifying with its conditions, you begin to realize that your true life is the life of God. The body may still experience symptoms from time to time, for it is part of the human scene, but you discover that your peace does not depend on the body's condition. You care for the body wisely, but you do not fear for it. And this freedom from fear opens channels of healing that anxiety once blocked. But perhaps the greatest transformation is this. You begin to live with a deep, unshakable sense of being carried by the presence, carried by the unseen activity of the infinite, carried by a love that cannot fail, cannot fade, cannot abandon. You do not feel this constantly at first, and that is all right. But gradually you notice that you are no longer moving through life alone, struggling, pushing, striving. Instead, you feel as though you are moving with something, supported by something, guided by something. And that something is nothing other than the presence within you experienced, not as an idea, but as a living reality. Eventually, there comes a moment, quiet, simple, not dramatic, when you realize that fear no longer has the same hold over you. It may arise, but it cannot dominate. It may whisper, but it cannot command. You have tasted the freedom of the inner kingdom, and once you have tasted it, the world can no longer imprison you in its illusions. This, my friends, is what transformation looks like. Not sudden perfection, but gradual awakening. Not the absence of challenges, but the presence of an inner stability that cannot be shaken. Not the elimination of the human experience, but the recognition that your true life is spiritual, eternal, invulnerable. And as this awareness deepens, you begin to realize something profound. You are not becoming something new, you are remembering what you have always been. The glory was always within you. The kingdom was always present. The presence was always yourself. Now you are learning to live from it, walk with it, trust it, and let it express through you. This is the true healing of anxiety, not the removal of fear, but the dawning of truth. And now, my beloved friends, as we bring this time of sharing to a close, let us gather all that has been revealed into one simple, living understanding. The kingdom of heaven is within you, here and now, awaiting your recognition. This truth is not something you must strive toward. It is not a distant goal. It is not a reward for spiritual achievement. It is the very reality of your being ever present, ever complete, ever available. All that we have spoken today, every practice, every insight, every moment of stillness is given for one purpose: to bring your awareness back to the inner presence that has never left you. Anxiety fades not because life becomes perfect, but because you awaken to a presence that is perfect regardless of life's appearances. Let this, then, be your daily remembrance. In the morning, before the world demands your attention, pause for a moment, not in effort, not in strain, but in quiet acknowledgement. The presence within me goes before me this day. No matter what comes, you begin anchored in reality. Throughout the day, as challenges arise, As thoughts pull you outward, as the senses tempt you with fear, pause for just one breath and quietly recognize only God is power. Only the presence is real. This is divine indifference, not refusing to care, but refusing to bow to appearances. In the evening, when the day is behind you, return once more to the inner sanctuary and gently review, not to judge, not to correct, but to recognize. Here I remembered. Here I forgot. Here the presence carried me. Each recognition strengthens you for the next day's unfolding. And now let me leave you with this assurance, as simple as it is profound. You are not on this path alone. You are not asked to succeed through willpower. You are not required to maintain perfect awareness. You are invited gently, patiently, lovingly to return again and again to the inner truth of your being. Every return is progress. Every recognition is healing. Every moment of remembrance is a step deeper into the kingdom. Do not measure your growth by feelings. Do not measure your progress by circumstances. Do not measure your awakening by the absence of fear. Measure it only by this: am I returning to the presence more often than before? If the answer is yes, even faintly yes, then the kingdom is already unfolding within you, for the presence that lives you has never once failed. It has never once abandoned you. It has never once been absent, and as you continue in this quiet recognition day after day, you will discover a peace that the world cannot give and cannot take away. You will discover that the fear which once seemed so powerful dissolves before the light of awareness. And you will discover that the kingdom of heaven, the living Christ, the infinite presence, was never far, never hidden, never withheld. It was always here, within you, as your very life. And now, my friends, you know how to turn toward it